Isso eu falei o ano passado, vale também, continua valendo. Mas, para a CPI, tá certo? Eu sou o negacionista.
Oops. Damn. Well, sorry about the music there. I thought I had the system worked out, but welcome to Left Reckoning. I'm Matt Leck. With me is David Griscom. David, hello on this abrupt episode 27.
Hey, man, I'm very ready for it. Just like my own 27th birthday happened a lot quicker than you expected. We're going to be joined in a little bit by Victor Pougy to talk a little bit about what's going on in Brazil and to talk about brave Bolsonaro as he stands against a deadly case of the hiccups. Victor will also be joining us for a little bit in the post game too. So be sure to check that out at patreon.com/leftreckoning. A little bit later in the show, bosses, they suck. And we all know you'd be happier if you'd see them less. We'll be breaking down what a 4-day trial, a work week showed in Iceland, and much, much, much more in the post game.
Let's just describe for folks what they saw at the cold open in there, in case they were unaware.
Yeah.
Now, look,
the forensics team.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Bolsonaro's hired his own forensics team, and they've argued in court that was just a chair creaking. But we've hired our forensics team, and I've looked at the waveform. I'm an expert myself. I've been doing audio production work for 7 years. That was a fart, especially subsequent information. We found out that Bolsonaro is in the hospital with hiccups. And now the thing about that is, like, I don't think those are like the normal hiccups. Like, I think there's some gastrointestinal going on.
Not the normal hiccups.
Because, look.
Nothing that related to Bolsonaro is normal. Let's get that straight right here.
Yeah, like, we've all heard of this, like, horror story, like, of the guy who got hiccups and it never went away, right? You remember that as a kid?
Yeah.
And, like, now, I do not think, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't think we live in a universe with God that, like, wants to intervene to the point where somebody as deserved as Bolsonaro ends up getting such an unlikely case of permanent hiccups. I think it's probably because he got stabbed in the guts, and it's coming back to bite him. But or he's just lying. There's something else going on. But anyway, Bolsonaro, I don't know. Like, it depends electorally. Like, get well soon. Like, what does it mean? Yeah. It really depends.
Well, I mean, the funny thing about Bolsonaro is he does have this knack whenever he is in trouble politically. He always seems to have these massive, health scares.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I've not seen any other world leader in a hospital bed as I have seen Bolsonaro over the past few years. I was joking on Twitter saying it's just because he wants to test the resiliency of the Brazilian healthcare system, that he's constantly coming up with new ailments to make sure that everybody's on their toes. But it really is something else.
Yeah.
Especially for somebody who, much like Trump did, prides himself as like some kind of like superhuman specimen who like can't get sick.
Well, that was the thing is we subsequently found out how close we were to getting Trump die from COVID, which again, like, this is why I don't think we live in a universe with this sort of benevolent God that loves to do fun shit. Because if Trump had died from a disease, a spread of a virus that he had been downplayed from the very start, it would have been, that's poetry. I mean, whether it would have, got through to enough people to have mattered on a level to save us from like future pandemics or to do, take any other major mass collective actions remains to be seen, but it would have been funny.
Something we all deserve for sure.
Exactly.
But we'll have Victor on a little bit to help us break all of that down. But before we get to that, we have to talk a little bit about domestic politics here in the United States. It's still anyone's guess what's going to happen regarding this infrastructure bill or the budget reconciliation process. Let's start with the good news, though, for sure. Bernie Sanders continues to stand, frankly, almost alone most of the time fighting for the American working people, and he's trying to use the tools at his disposal to pressure Democrats into putting a lot of good stuff into the budget reconciliation bill. Notably, and this is one of those rare things where we do get really excited about what's happening in Congress in relation to the PRO Act. Now, the posture of the Democratic Party in relation to the parliamentarian, who I think everybody who has any sense understands is somebody who can and should be overruled, especially when we're talking about things that are designed to help out the American people. The question still stands: will the Democratic Party have the backbone to stand up against a parliamentarian that is almost sure to try to block any of these more progressive parts of the budget reconciliation bill? But, we should take some good news as it comes. Anyways, what will happen with this is certainly an open question.
Yeah.
Certainly with regards to the infrastructure bill.
Yeah, I mean, just to flesh it out a little bit, like so reconciliation means it has to, like you said, go through the parliamentarian. So the first wave of cold water to go over this announcement was, okay, this is gonna be just axed out. Now, Brandon Magner, who's got a Substack, Labor Law Light, makes a case here that the PRO Act would pay for itself. So the bill's provisions for labor laws, fines, makes it a budgetary slam dunk. Now, I haven't. The thing is moving so fast, so I haven't really dug into this because eventually the bill will become more concrete. But it really depends on like how much of the PRO Act actually is able to get through reconciliation. And again, this is the sort of thing where all this new spending is great. The other good thing is they're extending the child tax allowance credit till 2025 is my understanding, which makes it more pertinent because then it comes up in 2025 again. And I haven't been following that closely because I don't plan on having kids, but I did go through the calculator earlier. And if let's say I'm earning $75,000 a year and I have 2 children under 6, that's going to get me $600 a month in payments. And then on my 2021 tax return, I got an additional $3,600 credit. So that's nice. And that's going to be good money for parents. I'm curious if we have any parents in the audience. Let us know, because those checks start going out tomorrow. And so like these are the structural things, and we're not going to get nearly as much as we want. Jayapal came out after this and said that she expects expansion of the age of the eligibility for Medicare in it. David Dayen says he doesn't see that. So and the problem is like, so what definitely is in there, or almost certainly I should say, is an expansion of benefits. And that's good, but unless you're expanding the eligibility, you're not getting closer to total coverage. And that's ultimately where like people need to be agitating for Medicare for all, right? Like that, if we're because ultimately if you expand those benefits, you may create a situation where it makes it harder to continue expanding that. Not to like say expanding benefits is bad. You just, just the politics of where the stuff could go. So yeah, how much of the PRO Act and that good things should come in this thing. It just remains to see, again, trust but verify, or don't distrust and verify, I think is probably the better approach.
Yeah. And honestly, like the cynical side of me really does see some of these proposals that we're seeing in the, in this reconciliation process in the budget bill to just be a laundry list of things for Democrats to try to run on in 2022. To say like, oh, we weren't able to get this because we didn't have a large enough majority, right? But again, you get these things in, I'm happy, right? It's important and I support it. But I don't want to sit around and make predictions about what's going to happen in Congress. I really wanted to spend this bit of time talking about the undeniable reality of the need, not just for climate action, but a fundamental shift in the way that we live. At this point, there is no other way to frame it or to understand it than this. Incrementalism at this point is climate denial. And that is all that we are seeing from Congress, right? We're having these conversations right now about them cutting down proposals that were inadequate from the start, right? There is nothing that is being pushed at the congressional level right now that comes close to addressing the fundamental problems that we face. climate catastrophe is an undeniable fact, but it's not abstract at all. It's something we're feeling as we speak, but it's still presented in this way as if it's some kind of abstract problem that we're going to face down the line. 107 people in Oregon are dead because of this unprecedented heat wave. And it's workers who are forced to put their lives at risk to fuel the machine of capitalism. The American wheat crop is in peril. And an early draft of a UN report has shown that species extinction, widespread disease, unlivable heat, collapse of entire ecosystems, cities threatened by rising sea levels are all coming to a child that would be born today by the time that they are 30. We're talking about the tax credits for children right now.
Yeah.
We're not even in a position right now where we can guarantee that there will be a livable planet for the next generation of people. Let that sink in for a second, and then watch the theater that's going on at the congressional level. The Believe Science crowd, that kind of slogan, it has permeated our culture and certainly our marketing at this point. But politically, it's still symbolism. What's been going on this past week? The major news story has been Whitey on the moon, right? The billionaire space race. Will it be Branson or Bezos or Elon? What bloated billionaire will launch himself into space while the planet burns? Matt, if you could pull up this first story here, because you would think that the deaths and the devastation that we're seeing in the Pacific Northwest, along with the coming wildfires, would allow us to have better coverage of climate change. But as this piece in Gizmodo points out, why TV is so bad at covering climate change, by Molly Taft, I'll just read this first bit to y'all. On Saturday, Catherine Hyho, I apologize if I mispronounced that, a climate scientist at Texas Tech University, tweeted that she'd be appearing on CNN to talk to Fareed Zakaria about the record-breaking heat wave gripping the West. The next day, she announced her segment had been bumped, due to billionaire going to space, she wrote. Hyho was slated to appear on CNN as Death Valley was clocking the highest temperature ever reliably recorded on the planet, on the heels of another heat wave that killed hundreds of people across the Pacific Northwest and Canada. Meanwhile, Richard Branson spent 3 or 4 minutes waitlist to advertise a spaceship that will offer seats for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and earned wall-to-wall coverage on broadcast networks this weekend, many of which aired footage on his brief joyride. That's the reality of the media right now, and it does not get better when it comes to politicians and certainly to political media. In addition to these stories of what's happening in the west of this country, today, The Guardian reported for the first time ever, we have this as well, for the first time ever, the Amazon rainforest is now going to emit more CO2 than it absorbs. These are planetary failures of systems. This is how we are able to sustain ourselves, how we're able to breathe air. This is the necessary building blocks of life, and they're under threat. And what do we get from our political media, right? You get a political class that's proposing middling proposals, refusal to take the systemic action necessary, right? They want to be able to say when they go up for re-election in 2022, oh, we're trying to fight for climate change, right? We believe science, all this kind of stuff, right? They still see this as a political, football to play around with, instead of something that is a moral, Jesus Christ, just a basic survival instinct imperative to start to address. So you're getting these middling proposals from the Democrats, and then of course, complete wahoo stuff from the GOP, which still, is trying to challenge the science of climate change. And then you have people like rich pundits like Matt Iglesias, who Matt and I were talking about during the think tank on Monday for patrons. Matt Iglesias sitting around scolding youth climate activists in the Sunrise Movement to say, well, actually, Biden's plan does address climate change. It's building some electric vehicle charging stations across the country, right? I mean, it's absurd when you look at the size of the United States economy and you see what they're talking about putting forward, and you remember that this was the promise that they were actually going to fundamentally do something. The pragmatists, the centrists, the realists were finally going to address climate change. We're nowhere near real action. It's score settling. It's appeasement. Have a monetary figure that you can point to during the Democrats' seemingly doomed 2022 elections, right? Oh, you say climate change is real? Well, look, we built some electric vehicle stations. We're going to plug some mines. As we're recording this right now, there are lobbyists on the phone trying to cut spending in both this budget reconciliation bill and in the infrastructure bill. Redirecting the funding in ways that's going to profit them and make them more and more money, or trying to market themselves as green. The Verge reported that 92% of S&P companies have vowed to cut their emissions. But when you look behind the nice press releases, right, you see actually no really functional material, material commitment to addressing these problems, right? You see that green marketing is very effective. People across the globe recognize that there's a problem, but nobody fundamentally wants to do anything about it. And in politics, especially in the United States right now, it's a great way to sell yourself as somebody who takes climate change seriously. But if you're not serious about what needs to be done, then you're doing the same kind of game as the Republicans. And I just want to be concrete for a moment, right? I don't want to play games GOP versus Democrats, because frankly, the world is at a point where having those kind of conversations about the American political parties is almost a sideshow. What needs to be done? What is to be done? Believe science. Oh, climate change is real. Listen to the science. All of these slogans are now being exposed as being extremely hollow, as is this practical, the Biden approach, which is feigning action, right? Putting a little bit of money here and there to some projects, right? Which again, is better than nothing, but it sure as hell is not enough.
Yeah, I mean, we're still in like 2008, as if it's Biden's first term as vice president. Like drilling, right? Just one metric. Biden's been drilling like a motherfucker. Like Trump has a 3-month span that's a record. Biden's second. And he's been killing it, and it's because they're viewed as partners. Oil and gas is viewed as partners to the transition. If you look at all of Biden's, like Deb Haaland, right? She should conceivably be Biden's most anti, because I think like there's another woman, I can't remember her name, but she went up to Williston to basically tell the oil and gas, Williston, North Dakota, oil country, the Bakken oil boom place, that, hey, we're going to be good. And the way they couch it is, it's funny, like they'll steal enough Green New Deal framing, which is like, we want to make sure every worker here is taken care of, but ultimately, it's about taking care of the executives and what their priorities are. But it's, yes, oil and gas is a partner, and I don't know if we want to get too ahead of ourselves, but you contrast that with the way Lula handled Amazon deforestation.
Yeah.
I have actually I can
pull that up.
Here, got that right now. I was looking at this article here, Guardian, that Amazon rainforest will collapse if Bolsonaro remains president. Present academics and activists issue warning amid fresh assault on environmental protections. And this paragraph, a few paragraphs into it, Amazon deforestation reduced 80% between 2004 and 2012 under the Workers' Party administration of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Bolsonaro has steadily dismantled or discredited the mechanisms that achieved that, like monitoring personnel on the ground and legislation to punish offenders and demarcate indigenous land and conservation areas. Now, if you can take tens of millions of people out of poverty while protecting the rainforest, I'd say like that's a type of politics that people should be listening to.
I think that's 100% point, right? And also a good reminder of some of the kind of pseudo green criticisms of Lula that we saw after his, after the illegal coup against him. But before we go to Victor and we talk a little bit more about Brazil, I want to hit this, and I want to make these things very clear, right? Because you can talk about the political calculus that you have to do dealing with Congress. You can talk about all these kind of things. But frankly, I think it's time that we start making the case to the people about what an actual alternative would look like and what we need to do to meet this moment. We can't fall for these abstractions. To confront climate change, we have to control these things. We have to control industry. We have to control transportation. And that's why the infrastructure bill is important. Remember, when you make a decision to go to the grocery store and you drive your car or whatever, right? You're doing that because of the infrastructure that's around you, right? That is what dictates our decisions much more than your own kind of moral, feelings of responsibility, right? Access is critical here, and that's why infrastructure and having a green transportation program needs to be something that's democratically controlled for the people, not just for special interests. We need to control energy production and distribution. That means controlling your own power sources, the power distribution projects and plants, right? And also taking into public control as much as possible industries like oil, natural gas, and coal. Right. We also need to be controlling agriculture, and we need to be creating a national program to re-up and re-equip buildings with green technology and green ways to prevent, freezing in the winter and overheating in the summer.
I mean, we have a great opportunity to do that after the collapse in Florida. David Dayen had a good bit in the American Prospect that a lot of these high-rises were built after 80s deregulation, and maybe we might have some other problems, and that might not be the only one that has some structural issues. So we absolutely, we need to check things for soundness. We need maintenance, and then future, infrastructure on top of that. You'll hear a lot of talk about how great it is that we're spending $4.1 trillion, and obviously the point we already said about the structural things being important, but we need to spend lots, because we have not been spending nearly enough just to maintain the society that we've inherited.
We need to spend lots, right? But also know that, the spending is one thing, the control and the shift is another, right? We simply can't do these things with market incentives, right? You can't create nice, you can't just do it through subsidies, and you can't just do it through tax breaks. You need central planning. Right? When you look at the history of industrialization, what happened in the United Kingdom and Europe when it came to building the railways and using coal power and steam power was a world historic, unique moment where market incentives work to basically reorient an entire economy and an entire society in a different direction than it had been 50 years in the past, right? We don't have time for that. And I'm going to tell you right now, the money's still in the coal and the oil and the natural gas. And if we don't shift that, if we rely on this engine, capitalism, to deliver us a green energy, we will be waiting on a planet that is on fire. In the United States, we have a bold history of this kind of thing. We have the TVA, which has some issues, right? But it took a bold and expansive mandate for itself to understand we're going to electrify a part of the country that has not had this. And we're also going to use this as a way to reinvigorate the economy, give people opportunity, give people education. And that's something that we should be upholding today. We have to. This is non-negotiable. We have to have democratic control of our energy production and our grids. What's happening in the Northwest right now is an example of that. What happened in Texas in February is an example of that. Hell, what's happening in Texas right now? It's hot in Texas again, surprise. And we're already starting to see warning signs that the grid might fail again, right? This has to be under public control, not in the service of private interests. We have to fully fund a climate core. We have the opportunity to do that. We have the need to do that right now. And we must fully take advantage of any opportunity to capture more and more of the oil industry, as what happened under COVID-19 gave us a huge opportunity to try to seize those things. I don't care about the Democrats and the GOP anymore. We know what needs to be done, and we need to make this case clear to people, because the false fight between the believe science Dems, right, who are just willing to do green symbolism, and climate change denying GOP is going to get us nowhere but a world of hurt.
Here's a counterpoint. Elon
Too worked
Musk,
up for this.
Those who attack space maybe don't realize that space represents hope for so many people.
Yeah. That is what your future is if we don't do anything. Your future is, an escape plan led by wackos like Elon Musk. I much prefer a democratic socialist future where we take control of our society and of our missions.
You imagine Elon Musk leading your space colony, the guy that like accused a rescue diver of being a pedophile because he wouldn't use his fancy submarine. Like, you think that guy's?
Yeah, I forgot about that shit. Man, this guy actually was so upset that the divers who were saving those children, was it in Thailand or was it in Indonesia? It was in Indonesia, wasn't it? I can't remember off the top of my head. The divers who were saving those kids didn't want to wait for Elon Musk to design some special little boy-sized submarine.
This is a guy who has been at parties and photographed with Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yes.
And he said sus about a guy that wouldn't use his fucking submarine.
Well, he publicly accused the guy of being a pedophile. Which, Matt, you made a good point. I don't know if you remember this.
Yes, which is that like there's two possible ways that he's right there, which is, or two like solutions are: one, he just libeled somebody, and two, he has inside information, probably because he's like friends with Peter Thiel or something, or he like hires private eyes or whatever the fuck to like sleuth into the guy, which is concerning. And he's sitting on that information, like he knows about it.
Making it public.
Instead of making it public, he's sitting on it and just dripping it out. As a way to try to get his submarine used. So, yeah. But anyway, thanks, Elon, for being just the mascot for just idiotic capitalism.
For sure.
That he is.
Well, in a moment, we're going to be joined by Victor Pougy to talk about Brazil, Bolsonaro, and what the future looks like for the fight against another version of climate denialists. And also after that, we're going to be talking about the 4-day work week program in Iceland. Looking forward to that. And join us all in the post game too at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Be back in just a moment.
Victor's going to be joining us in the post game as well.
Yeah.
So
party.
All right. We'll see you in a little bit, folks.
Welcome back, everybody, to Left Reckoning. We're joined tonight by our friend, Victor Pougy. Victor Pougy is a Brazilian journalist, formerly at The Intercept, and he's going to be hanging out with us a little bit, talking about Bolsonaro's brave fight with hiccups, along with some Lula news, and basically this really invigorating story down in Brazil. But before we get to all that, how are you doing tonight, Victor?
Pretty good, guys. Thanks for having me. And, we're all sending the best wishes to our warrior hiccups who have been stuck with Bolsonaro for 10 days now. So, it must be hard.
Oh, man. Can you imagine smelling one of those hiccups? Just the rancid.
Did you? Okay.
Right.
This is like the latest, breakingest news in these front is that, he was rushed to the hospital after having had hiccups for 10 days. And apparently, they drained 1 kilo of poop out of his intestine through a tube up his nose.
Oh,
so
Lord.
oh my God, can you imagine? Ugh.
I mean, this is really, it
Reap
really
what
is.
you sow. So,
Yeah.
phrase which I heard around here.
Can you imagine having the country's best doctors and hospitals at your disposal, and then having the hiccups for 10 days, and then having to be rushed to the hospital? Why wouldn't you get that shit checked out before? It's just weird.
No, his body definitely needs to be studied by science for a long time, because as you were joking before, I don't think I've ever seen a world leader in a hospital gown as many times as I've seen Bolsonaro for the past few years.
I think this is actually a pretty awesome illustration of the difference between the Protestant and the Catholic ethic with regards to this stuff. Remember, Trump had COVID, and they wouldn't let him he wouldn't let anyone take photos of him in the hospital, or he won't be pictured without his suit and looking strong, whereas Bolsonaro as a true Catholic trying to make a martyr out of him and suffer publicly and try to get people to feel sorry for him. It's where the cultural difference really shines through.
Well, we can poke fun at Bolsonaro, because this story that we're going to be told and presented by Victor truly is horrifying. Brazil just crossed the grisly statistic that way over 500,000 people have passed away from the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's obviously so much context that's needed, but I think we should try to focus on what is the most inflammatory revelation that has come out of these congressional inquiries into Bolsonaro and his camp. That essentially there has been a huge embezzlement scheme regarding some of the potential vaccines for the COVID-19 pandemic. Could you just sort of present to us, I know it's hard and a lot, but we try to be a little bit brief. What's been going on with COVID-19 over the past, few months in Brazil, and what this congressional inquiry is and what it's found?
Yeah. Pandemic began as it began everywhere with people scared and not knowing what to do. And from day one, Bolsonaro was kind of positioning himself against the pandemic, not as someone who's like fighting against it, but someone who's like not believing it real. I think for a while, like his thinking was that, it's unpopular to have people stay at home. It's unpopular like to close bars and restaurants, and he would have like let everyone else do the hard bits, and he would be like the guy who's like standing up for the little guys who can't get their haircuts or whatever. So this was like initially the thing, but then it started escalating the pandemic right into real because it's the first right in the first week. It's always like, oh, some guy that like arrived from Italy like is sick, and no one could really imagine how grave it would be. But then it turned out it was going to be really, really serious. And the governors, because Brazil, much like the US, is like a relatively decentralized federation. So each state's government has a relative autonomy. So it was governors that were charging forward with the sanitary measures. And it kind of became polarized, and like, the Bolsonaro guys are the ones who are like, screw this, like we're not staying home. And the opposition, which in the beginning was only like left-wing parties, but now like center-right and like neoliberals are grouping them together as Bolsonaro becomes so unpopular. But so this was the beginning. Bolsonaro kind of like sabotaging the sanitary measures, but it started really to escalate when the São Paulo governor started appearing more in the media. He's like a right-wing guy who was kind of like elected in a pro-Bolsonaro kind of a ticket in São Paulo. But he has presidential ambitions. Everyone knows that. So when he started shining as an anti-COVID guy, Bolsonaro like started really boycotting him, and that's when we saw how far he was willing to take this posture. So we see this guy in São Paulo who is a really horrible guy. Like, no credit to him, even though like he deserves some credit here. But and São Paulo has a public health and a public health industrial park that's relatively developed, and they like from day one like they had a partnership with a Sinovac, the Chinese pharmaceutical company that was producing vaccines, and the idea was to have a transfer of technology and start producing this vaccine here in Brazil, which was something that's a good thing that most people would be for. But Bolsonaro was really scared of this guy being associated with such a positive thing, so he started boycotting that vaccine, and he started boycotting every single vaccine, right? So everything was so disastrous. He was like sabotaging the social distancing. He was flaunting, mask. It wasn't like mandates. It wasn't mandatory, but it was recommendation that people should wear masks, and he was not. He was like making fun of it. He was like, and then he was pushing these medications that don't really work against COVID. I think like Trump flirted with that as well, but he quickly abandoned it. Bolsonaro doubled, tripled down. It still is. But then it got so bad that the opposition decided to do a congressional investigation, which is I guess similar to how it does in the U.S. Right? It's a right of the minorities. It's right of the opposition to have this, and it has like subpoena powers and all that stuff. They can like have people come and give explanations about things, so all that stuff about the pandemic mismanagement. And the first thing that really jumped out was the fact that Pfizer, the pharma company, multinational, wanted to use Brazil as kind of the showcase for their vaccine. So the idea was that we're going to like vaccinate Brazil. It's going to work, and then like we're going to sell our vaccines to the rest of the world using like pointing to Brazil as an example of as a success story, right? But then it turns out, and this was something that came out with a congressional investigation, as they had the CEO of Pfizer come and give testimony. They had, all kinds of people that were involved in that, and they got access to their emails. And, there was like literally like dozens of emails from the Pfizer people to the like Ministry of Health, to the Brazilian embassy in the US, to the, foreign minister, anyone they could think that like may have like the year of the president or email like, hey, we really want to sell these vaccines to you guys, and they were like ignoring. And for a lot of the time, like people were like trying to rationalize all this stuff into like some like this ideological framework. Wow, Bolsonaro's an anti-vaxxer, that's why he doesn't want to do this thing. Or like, oh no, Bolsonaro is not like sabotaging this because he doesn't want to like help the governor of Sao Paulo like produce his own vaccine and be popular in that. And all this speculation like to try to explain why is he behaving like that. But as it turns out, they were just boycotting those because they had a grift running on other vaccines, right? So they were like resisting to these vaccines because they had a different one that they were hoping to buy and in which they get money
and
on
just
the side. Right?
So despicable the way that they rationalize it too about the Pfizer vaccine, right? Bolsonaro says stuff about I think you mentioned when we were talking earlier about the clauses for Pfizer. He said like, well, what if you take a Pfizer vaccine and it turns you into an alligator, right? Like just like the worst kind of anti-vax rhetoric.
Yeah, and you know, like there's I love like presenting Brazilian expressions and idioms, but this one's really good, which is that, like, you know, if these motherfuckers could fly, we'd never see the sunlight. You know, we'd never get any sunlight. Which is that, you know, like,
I like that.
these guys are really horrible, and like and you know, like, they don't give a shit. Like, you know, they're like running, like trying to get, you know, like $1 a dose, like on as a, you know, a side gig where like half the country's dying. But yes, you know,
Wait, can we just put this in clear terms, right? So this like embezzlement scheme is that Bolsonaro basically has friends or a kind of middleman situation going on for these later vaccines that come in.
Yeah. So the thing started, which is, you know, as you know, with Brazilian politics recently, the whole cast of characters is very wacky and crazy. But it all started when there's this a guy he's a new to politics kind of guy who was elected in the huge Bolsonaro wave, and you know, his shtick, his thing is that he immigrated to the U.S. And you know, got rich, and he has all like this, you know, get rich quick schemes, you know, like in the rise and grind, you know, mindset. You know, he's a huge mindset guy with a like specific kind of people who like immigrate to the US, right? So like his Twitter handle is just like, you know, John Smith USA, you know, stuff like that, right? So he gets elected, and as a like a pro Bolsonaro guy, he was like, you know, oh yeah, like screw all this stuff, let's change it. Whatever. Turns out this guy's brother is a public servant, like in you know, within the bureaucracy of the health minister. He's the guy who signs the invoices for importing and exporting. And it turns out that you know, he got like this really shady document for buying of Indian-made vaccine, which is not really in use anywhere. It's not really ready. Like it's not ready yet, right? It's in the development phase. And, you know, fair enough. Most vaccines were bought while they were still being developed, but this one is like way behind the others. It's more expensive, and it's not approved by the Brazilian equivalent of the FDA. But then this guy, like, he's got this really shady document that looked like weird. You know, there was like, instead of paying directly to the pharmaceutical company, he was paying through like a middleman in Singapore, and he thought this whole thing was shady. And he told like his brother, like, hey, you know, there's something wrong here. Tell the president that you know, there's a problem here, because both of them were like with the idea that like, oh, Bolsonaro's like this very honest guy, and he wouldn't want any corruption to happen. So it's just a matter of him not being informed, because of course, if you tell him, he's going to sort it out, right? That was the logic they were operating under. So this guy comes up and says, look, there's like this really shady contract. I'm getting like calls from a lot of people higher up who are like pressuring me to move forward with this. So his brother allegedly alerted Bolsonaro about it. Was like, hey, look, this is wrong. And then Bolsonaro allegedly said, oh, forget about that. Like, this is Ricardo Barros stuff. Like, don't mess around with this stuff. Like, just let it run, because this is someone's grift, you know, that I'm not going to touch. And, you know, that someone was the leader of the government in Congress. He was a former health minister who was a health minister during the Temer government, who was a neoliberal government that came to power after the coup. So like, this guy who has like this very deep, very wide connection to the shady underworld of like health grifting within the Brazilian public health system. But, you know, Bolsonaro was alerted that this shady stuff was going on and didn't do anything. It was kind of like saying like, yeah, let's just turn a blind eye to it. And from there, like, it started growing. So there's now histories of other shady contracts like that, all in the same vein, right? Like weird middlemen appearing and inserting themselves, claiming to represent companies that they don't really represent. Or, you know, and, you know, there's like this figure of like, oh, there's like police officer who also sells vaccines, or, you know, and so this is the gist of it, right? The people within the government were sabotaging the legit vaccines that are available because they wanted the non-legit vaccines to be purchased because that's the one they would make money in. Basically, that's the gist of it.
It's just so rich to remind people. I know most people listening to this are very familiar with the Lula case and the allegations against him. But for people who are not, I'll just give you the quick, skinny version of it, which is that Lula, a president who pulled millions of people out of poverty, immensely popular, gets wrapped up in these allegations of corruption that effectively boil down to him getting some renovations done for cheap on an apartment at a beach in Brazil that's not even the most popular ritzy beach or anything like that, right? And these were all proven to be false and incorrect, by the way. But I'm just saying, like, even at like their allegation, that was the level of allegation that was enough to topple somebody like Lula. And Bolsonaro sort of rises up in the chaos of this as somebody, I'm against corruption, I'm not of this kind of world. And now, after coming to power with, by the way, it has to be noted, American government support, is now somebody who is implicated in a corruption scandal that is not only immense, but is so egregious and anti-human that it's really hard to overstate the severity of this.
Stakes of public health. Like, the public health is at stake. It's not Lula. Like, even if that was all true, it's not like hundreds of thousands of people could die from it.
Yeah, it's like vaccines to a deadly disease, and they're like running shenanigans on the like acquiring these vaccines because they are like running a grift.
Yeah, you're right. Not only taking money off of the top, but denying other solutions too. Yeah, that's a very important
and
point.
even let's say like they were like taking money off the top of a thing that was like superbly well run and working properly. Like, these guys are like taking money off the top of something that's not even working well, right? There's like this idea in Brazil, like, because corruption is so widespread, there's this image of politician that's like, yeah, he's corrupt, but he gets things done, right? It's kind of like a qualifier that people have. Yeah, like, he's kind of shady, but at least he delivers the goods. Bolsonaro doesn't either. He's like, takes all the money, but he doesn't do anything. But I think this whole like these corruption investigations that we're seeing now it's kind of like the cherry on top of a poop flavored sundae that is the last few weeks of Bolsonaro's government. And now we're seeing, like, as all things collapse, that old corruption grifts that he ran when he was like a federal congressman are starting to come up as well. And these are all like, small time grift kind of stuff that, like, benefiting like your friends and all, like, the police officers, people like, ex-wife, like brother of his wife, all this kind of stuff. And he is like super implicated in both him and his sons, who have been politicians since they were, kids almost. Like one of his kids, number 2, he refers to his kids by the numbers, right? Like that's how healthy his household is. It's like 01, 02, and 03.
Yeah.
But 02 ran, and they had to like get a special permission for him to run because he wasn't 18 yet, but like he would have been 18 by the time he took office. So, it was allowed, but he was running like as he was 17, and he was just like getting votes from his dad, right? And his dad was basically controlling the whole thing. And the scheme that he was running, like Bolsonaro was running on all of his kids' offices, was of hiring fake workers, right? So, I get elected, and then I'm like, hey, Matt, hey, David, like I have this thing, like now that I'm elected, I get to hire like 4 people. So, I'm just going to put your names down. Like you say you're employed by me. You keep like $1,000 and kick back to me the rest of the salary. It's good for you. Like you get some money without having to do any work, and I get all my money back. So this is the kind of stuff that he was running. small time corrupt like Rio de Janeiro like underworld that got like propelled to the presidency of the largest country in the continent and, you know, one of the largest economies in the world. So it's just this kind of ethos that is working, that he brings to the office. And so now we have like he is really in a very bad situation, to the point where you know, even he is seeing the writing on the wall that he cannot be elected. Like if things remain as they are, he's going to lose badly, which brings us to a very dangerous place, because you know it's when these you know, it's when dogs are cornered that they attack, right? So that is a risk for
all your
2022,
families
not accepting.
Like that's the thing, is like you've got so entrenched in it that all the people around you, like, you have to fight for them kind of too. Like the incentive to fight it out is huge. That's terrifying.
Yeah, there's no reason for him to you know, let it go, you know, unless like some people offer him some sort of deal, like, yeah, you know, just leave us alone and no one will prosecute you. But yeah,
I think there's like a sort of dark coalition of just criminality that is under maybe examined in right-wing politics. Like we talked about that stat of Lula cutting 80% of illegal deforestation down between 2004 and 2012. What do you think those illegal deforesters do? Like, right, like that's capitalized criminality, right? And I also think Trump spoke for that in America too, right? Like you have all this class of sort of like not the biggest, but like ultimately like scammers and criminals. Like I want a book on that. Verso should get on that or something like that.
I got some contacts we can call them.
Yeah.
It's the militia ethos, like, because this is something that you know, Bolsonaro is very much a creature of Rio de Janeiro, right? And you know, they run like these like schemes. It's just like these grifts that are just embedded into the running of society, right? So it's like either like garbage collection, you know, they have territory control, and then, you know, shenanigans with garbage collection, or, you know, motorbike deliveries, or gas bottles, because, you know, you cook with gas here, and some people have you know, the line connected, or some people need to buy these bottles and then they control the bottles, or you know, water, selling water, cable TV, you know, all this stuff. There's like these small, not small time, but like medium time criminals, but they like become like embedded in the like fabric of the state, right? And the thing you said about like these illegal deforestation, like wildcat mines, that's exactly it. It's he appeals to the kind of people who are like, have this like, you know, ethos of, I can just go myself and you know, like, fucking like, I'm gonna go find gold and I'm gonna like strike gold and I'm gonna get rich, and like, if only like these motherfuckers like will let me use mercury and you know, destroy everything, like it'll be all right, you know. And Bolsonaro's whole thing is about like removing like these barriers to you doing whatever the fuck you want to do. So he's like removing penalties for driving dangerously. Like he's like saying, oh, you're not forced any longer to have a car seat for your kid. Like it's all these things that, like, you know, I just want to do whatever the fuck I want and not be accountable to anyone. And it's the sort of stuff. But yeah. But now, you know, Bolsonaro's government, and this is something I said just a second. Whatever, I dropped my pencil, but I was not writing anything. That his government is heavily militarized.
Yes.
And these corruption things are getting to these military officers, right? Like it was a general in charge of the health ministry during all this stuff, and now the army is like putting out notes threatening to be like, oh, we won't accept like to have our like names dragged to the mud. Like, you shouldn't accept your generals like doing these scripts, you know what I mean? But then when a congressional investigation like finds out, and they start threatening. So yeah, it's dangerous and seems to be unfurling quickly.
And just to remind people, American listeners who aren't familiar, I mean, remember that like Dilma and like Lula come up in opposition to military dictatorship, right? These kind of questions are very, very serious and present in Brazilian politics. Is threat of military intervention. You know, when we were talking about it recently, you had mentioned that like Bolsonaro's relationship with the military is he was sort of like the champion of like the petty officer, of like the small time officer, both in his time in the military and post. Could you sort of describe how that's
expelled? He was expelled from the military.
Yeah, and could you? I mean, maybe mention that story too, because it's very. I mean, it's very much tied to that as well, right? He was he was an intermilitary terrorist to fight for like petty officers' pay, correct?
Yeah, exactly. He is the petty officer's representative, and that's where how he got his name. He got kicked out on the officers because he was caught. He gave an interview to a weekly magazine saying that he was, with plans like the blueprints for a bomb he was going to explode, like for, in a terrorist attack, agitating for better pay for petty officers. And, the magazine reporter was like, shit, this is pretty wild. I better tell someone. So they told the military, like, so someone's planning a terrorist attack. Like, you should probably like do something about it. And, the reporter didn't really identify who he was, but it was easy for the military to find out who they were talking about. So he is like a man, a guy that was raised in the military, but he's not really he wasn't very well seen by the top officers. One of the generals that was in charge of Brazil during the military dictatorship called him a bad soldier. Wow. But who's laughing now? I guess. But what is I think, and I think that we touch on something that is very relevant, not just to Brazil, but to what's happening now, like on the news, because since redemocratization, which was a result of a broad popular movement of resistance to the military dictatorship, right? There's like this mythology that, the military just got tired and decided to give people back the keys to power. But, obviously it wasn't like that. It was like a huge upswell of resistance that was building for years and years, la-di-da. And, ever since redemocratization, the military was kind of well domesticated, right? There were kept within the confines of not meddling into politics. And you can kind of trace back this cadre of officers that are very much ultra Bolsonaristas and who are super willing to dabble into politics and threaten the institutions, to the UN interventions in Haiti. So the kind of people who are interfering in Brazilian politics now are the same people who were sent to Haiti to do a sub-imperialist intervention. I love Lula. I'm a left-wing guy. I'm a Workers' Party supporter. But this is something that, the Workers' Party should look very deep into and like apologize to the people of Haiti, apologize to the people of Latin America, and learn the lesson of it, because this intervention in Haiti was disastrous, not only to, everything that it was purporting to build, like the self-determination of Haitian people, was definitely not served for that. And basically these guys were sent to Haiti, where they learned how to exterminate and control populations. Come back to Brazil, this is when we see the escalating of the militarization of violence in the favelas, which has always been violence, right? Just going up there and killing everyone. But now it became organized. They had like armored vehicles and tactics and know-how that was developed in Haiti. And this core of officers are the ones that are now dabbling in politics. These guys got, they met, they got friendly and became a cohesive unit within the army in Haiti, which is just a disastrous thing for Brazil to have done. And this is something that we need to face and learn that, Brazil, as much as we like to think of ourselves as a progressive country, was complicit, and more than complicit, perhaps a protagonist in the repression of Haiti. I'm sure there's people who know Haitian history much better than I do, and who can be much more eloquent in explaining the consequences and reasons why this intervention was so disastrous. But this is something that Brazilians, especially left-wing Brazilians who are, as I am, admirers of Lula, we need to learn that this was bad and we shouldn't have done it, and we should never do it again.
I mean, for sure. And I mean, I wanted to sort of pivot in the last few minutes to talking about Lula and in particular the the prospects of the presidential campaign there. But one of these things we've even seen from Lula post imprisonment has been this kind of reckoning, even with the history of his tenure, as president of Brazil and the PT in general. Like, this recognition that basically playing ball with Western powers, Western finance, etc., it didn't protect them at the end of the day from Lula. When Michael interviewed Lula, Lula was mentioning just like the amount of resentment that Obama had toward Lula. It's just like one of these kind of realizations that like you can play the game with Western powers and Western finance, but you're not sitting at the table if you're somebody who's trying to stand for the poor, right? And I think, given the context, in the history, I want to ask you this question, so I'll keep my commentary to a minimum. But
but your commentary is illuminating. It's good as well.
Thank you. But if you look at the history of Lula, right, there is this pivot before he becomes president. When early Lula was extremely fiery, and it was a very big threat, and he does come into popular power on this kind of like, okay, we'll do like a middle of the line role, like we'll allow the bourgeoisie and the powers that be to profit, but we're also going to make sure that we do not just the minimum, but do exceptional works for poor and working people in this country, and we raise the standards of living for folks. But you saw that backlash is always just sitting underneath the surface, and it can come very quickly if it's Bolsonaro or someone else. But I wanted to ask, sort of like, in response, you could see like this is obviously politically slam dunk for Lula to be able to attack Bolsonaro. But what's the kind of message that we're seeing? What is the situation in the U.S.? Obviously, people have been very happy to see some of the early polling that puts Lula far ahead. But what's the terrain looking like? What's Lula's sort of recent, politicking been like?
Yeah, so this is interesting and a lot of things to unravel there. So the first thing that changed the game, everything. I think there's like, if we were to plot the Bolsonaro government in a timeline, and if we had to find a moment for a before and after, obviously I'm not going to put before the pandemic and after the pandemic because that's way too obvious, right? Mm-hmm. There's a clear before and after, which was when Lula got his political rights back. Mm-hmm. So Bolsonaro was just playing unopposed, right? Because the left-wing opposition was kind of focused and using a lot of its energy to fight the imprisonment of Lula and the illegalities that are associated with it, on the understanding that it's not only about like saving Lula, the guy, but on the understanding that if we let them like get away with this, like there's never going to be a left-wing leader again that doesn't get this shit done to them as well. So the logic was that we have to like defend Lula and even the parties that broke with PT. So there's an assortment of left-wing parties that are distanced from the PT in like different moments that broke, like, oh, you guys are too neoliberal now, like we got to start a legit actual left-wing party. And even those guys were very reluctant to kind of associate with Lula, all like took up the banner of Free Lula, because I'm reading that this is just a template of something that they could do to any one of us. So Lula got his political rights back, and this was when both the left could like go back to being a actual true opposition, and when the right had to move, because the center right was very comfortable in just letting Bolsonaro do everything they wanted to do while pretending to oppose it, but not really doing anything. So now with Lula, like in the game, everyone had to scramble to reposition themselves and actually do some opposition, right? So, and since then, Lula has just been growing against Bolsonaro in all the polls that have been done, to the point that now on the latest poll, Lula is basically winning outright in the first round. So, we have a runoff election. So from the latest information that we have, polls just show that Lula is ahead and very likely to win somewhat easily. And so this is kind of the scenario as it is. So we have a bunch of people who aren't Lula and who aren't Bolsonaro who are trying to break this polarization. I don't like to call it polarization because I think it's very asymmetrical. But it's got two poles, so it wouldn't be totally imprecise to call it polarization, and it's very hard to break from it. So like all these supposed third way kind of guys trying to break through, and Lula just kind of accumulating forces. We now have organized street protests that are happening kind of like periodically. Called at first by left-wing parties, social movements. So we have the landless workers, the homeless workers, which are probably the two most important non-party social movements here in Brazil. Unions and the left-wing parties, the usual left-wing parties calling for these protests. But now more civil society kind of like minded, almost like NGO type guys are joining in calling for the protests and all that stuff. So, we have Lula, shooting up in the polls. We have a perception of corruption in Bolsonaro's government also increasing because of the things that are being exposed in the congressional investigation. Because Bolsonaro's platform was basically like, one of his campaign talking points was like, oh, these guys call me authoritarian, they call me fascist, they call me far right because they can't call me corrupt, right? And this like weird bizarro understanding of like that is shaped Brazilian politics and has shaped Brazilian politics for decades now, as like corruption as the big bad thing that has to be combated above everything else. And there's I think this may be a conversation for another time, why anti-corruption politics in itself is not enough. We need to do more than just saying corruption is bad. But this is kind of like the dominant trend of politics in Brazil and how politics is and has been done for a long time now. And Bolsonaro is losing like the one thing that he could say, like, oh, at least I'm not corrupt. And, now that all these things are becoming clear. And what is an interesting wrinkle and that is like unprecedented is that Bolsonaro is having a hard time finding a party he could run in. It's just like jumping from party to party has been for ages. And also somewhat of a postmodern phenomenon of like, party-less types that are just personal brand politicians that don't really have organized movements behind. Bolsonaro was kind of like this kind of person. And he jumped into a party that was willing to have him. We have like a multitude of parties in Brazil, a multi-party system. And a lot of these parties are just kind of like family-owned enterprises where one guy just has like the stamp control. He can do like controls the whole thing. So, and parties, they get state funds to run their candidates. So the logic was kind of like, we're willing to give Bolsonaro control of the whole electoral funding if he runs in our party, right? So he went to one party, he ran, he won, quickly left the party because they were fighting over the spoils, over the funds. So he's been partyless. So he's a president that doesn't have a party. And now he's looking for one, but it's getting harder and harder for him to find because, usually you would have thought like that the sitting president wouldn't have a hard time finding a party, but now he's becoming so toxic that even that, like it's becoming hard. So this is a really interesting change from parties fighting over the opportunity to run him. Like we have one party rebranded itself, changed its name, changed its logo, like patriotic green and yellow flag waving sort of stuff. Bolsonaro didn't even go there, right? So like they rebranded the whole thing, and he didn't even move to that party. So we're kind of like in this weird situation in which is an unpopular incumbent president that is in search of a party, but is And it's very far off. There's like a year, 4 months to election, so a lot could happen still. But it seemed like, as things stand right now, he's going to have a really hard time winning. And again, this is where the risks come, because more than a regular military coup, as it's kind of like the model of Latin American history, the risk is that police officers in the state police rebel against the governors. This seems to be the weakest link, although there's coup mongering movements both within the higher echelons of the military, but that with less pronounced. The generals, as wacky and crude and bad as they are, they have a modicum of a resemblance of pretending to care, whereas petty officers are openly revolting now. So we're seeing like and during the military government here in Brazil, there was this, when they were passing the legislation that was the hardest, most repressive legislation that they passed, which was when suspended like political liberties, the AI5, so the Institutional Act number 5, which is the set piece of the military dictatorship. And when all the generals were signing in their meetings, and the only person that was opposed to it was the then vice president, which incidentally was the only civilian in the room. And one of the generals, supposedly, this may be apocryphal, but it's a very known history here, very known story here in Brazil. The vice president was civilian, was uncomfortable with signing it, and the general asked him, "So, do you not trust us?" And the vice president, that civilian guy, was like, "It's not that I don't trust you guys. I don't trust the guard in my street corner. Like, it's not about like the generals, like you guys having this power, and I may trust that you guys are going to use it wisely, but there's like thousands and thousands of petty officers that are going to feel empowered by that." And this is what we're seeing. Like we've had like people who are like protesting Bolsonaro, and the police arrest them, take them to the police station, harass them for a few days, and then obviously like is illegal, and then they end up like released a few days later. And this kind of like petty harassment of opposition by these like lowly street corner guards that is seems to be the riskiest bit.
Yeah, it's certainly worrying, and as it is here sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, too. We're sort of running up at our time, but just before we leave, and remember, folks, Victor's going to be joining us in the post game, hanging out, answer some questions. So definitely be hearing more from him in a second. But I just did want to ask, because this seems to be the play. What kind of early signs are we getting that if Bolsonaro does not win, that he might start crying electoral fraud?
Yeah, well, he's already saying that he doesn't trust the electoral system. Brazil has a very interesting electoral system with electronic voting, not over the internet, but you go to a ballot station and you vote into these. I spilled some water here. You vote into these by typing numbers into a computer, and special computers that are built just for that and tested. And it's been done for ages now. And Bolsonaro is trying to create doubt over the integrity of that system. He even said that there was a fraud in 2014, which is why Dilma won. And even the guy who lost to Dilma had to come out and say, "No, guy, dude, like chill out. We lost because we lost." Yeah. But this is the plot. I mean, the thing, he's going to do a Keiko Fujimori, right? This is what he's going to do, and he's preparing the discourse now already. He's already like casting doubts into the integrity of the voting system. This is something. He's
not as close as Fujimori. Fujimori at least made it a close election. It looks like
exactly.
Lula's beating the pants off him. Like, I mean, I do think that is the pattern.
We need to make it like very big margins, right? So that
exactly. I think that's how that democracy is only going to get through this by big margins, because the right wing. They'll challenge it, and they have the courts, and they'll be able to maybe do something. But anything else we need to cover, guys?
Yeah, no, I just have a quick last thing that is somewhat important. You guys will remember the murder of Marielle Franco.
Yeah.
Years ago. She was a city councilor here in Rio. She was very known for her work against the militias that to which Bolsonaro is associated. This investigation has been dragging for a long time with no results. And two people who were heading this investigation have just quit, saying that they are being interfered with and not let them do the work. So something fishy going on there as well. There's some indicia of involvement of Bolsonaro with these militias. I have produced a video for the Intercept ages ago that explained this very well. So I suggest people watch it, but this is something to be cognizant of as well. The Marielle investigations are not going anywhere, and people are being pressured not to fully investigate it. So, troublesome.
Jesus. We'll definitely be keeping our eye on that. Folks should definitely be following Victor. We'll be putting ways to do that in the show notes below on this video. And Victor will be joining us in just a couple minutes in the post game. So thanks so much, Victor, for hanging out with us tonight.
Yeah, of course. See you guys in a bit.
See you a little bit,
soon.
Victor. All right. Do we need to take a little break ourselves, or we want to roll?
I can roll if you're good to go, Matt.
So David, it looks like 80. What is it? 6%. Wrote over my notes. People in Iceland are already on the 4-day, not 4 hour.
4 hour a week would be great too.
The 4-day work week.
That's the goal. Yeah, I mean, this is an exciting story, and we wanted to note it here. It's something that makes a lot of sense, I think, intuitively to people. That a significant amount of time at the workplace could functionally be reduced, meaning that you have more time to spend with your family and your friends, listening to shows like Left Reckoning at patreon.com/Left Reckoning, playing music, cooking food, living your damn life.
Playing old Wild West card games that have gone extinct, like I've been researching lately.
Go on for days and days and days. But I mean, basically the idea that, the 40-hour a week work week is something that was constructed. And it was something that was developed in a very particular set of circumstances to benefit a very specific group of people, namely the bourgeoisie and the ruling class, right? And remember, I mean, the 40-hour work week was a victory against essentially a 7-day a week work week, right? Where you had no time to yourself. There's been a lot of people who have made arguments for a long time that as we get more advanced technologically, that hopefully that would mean that people will be liberated from work. Unfortunately, the deck of power has been stacked so much in favor of those who benefit from extracting a value from labor and from workers that has been the case. So all of the gains of technological advancement have gone to the very, very few. But still, this idea that we could be working less is obviously extremely inspiring. And we have some proof now that it works. A long time, years-long study in Iceland, a small country, it should be noted, but a significant country nonetheless, that between 2015 and 2019, a UK-based think tank called Autonomy ran this study, basically shifting workers in Iceland to a 4-day work week. And I believe now 86% of workers in Iceland are now on this schedule, and it has found that not only does productivity not go down, it goes up, along with happier people who are living fuller lives, people who are self-reporting that they're healthier, all while not seeing any reductions in their wages. That's a critical thing, by the way, with the 4-day work week reduction, is that less work with no cuts in pay.
Right.
And what we're seeing right now is that this kind of fear that it would not be beneficial for capital have been proven to be incorrect. And we're seeing more and more, pushes for this in Spain and in other countries as well. Do you have anything top line here before? Because I want to make a good structural point, though, about the 4-day work week, too.
Oh, I mean, my real brief point is Magic Johnson should step out and be the spokesperson for the 32-hour work week. He could put his number 32 front and center. That's my top line. I like the idea of a 32-hour work week.
I mean, the 32-hour work week, I mean, the fact is that it works, and it works even by like capital's prerogatives too, right? I think as socialists, though, we shouldn't lean too hard into that, because here's the thing, is that while we're seeing the opening in countries like Iceland and in places where there have been years and years and years of militant labor organizing, like in northern Spain, something like that coming to the United States would require us, working people across this country, demanding it. And I think if we demand it, we shouldn't do it on capital's terms, right? So like, yes, it's very, very exciting, right? And it's a good thing to be able to point out like, oh, this doesn't hurt workers' productivity, right? We're still able to produce the same amount of things that we did. But I would also just go as far to say is like, even if it weren't the case that it helped out capital's bottom line, this would be something that is beneficial for us, because we need to understand that the labor fight is not just for higher wages, it's for more autonomy over our own lives.
Yeah.
And the way that our lives have been set up under industrial capitalism is that your life is effectively dominated by the needs of the bosses, and that shouldn't be the case. We don't need it as a society to have people working that many hours a week. And in fact, we can live better and more fulfilling lives and also meet a lot more of our external needs too, without relying on a 4-day work week. I mean, sorry, on a 5-day work week, and moving to a 4-day, or even ideally to less than that as well.
Yeah, it's a more extreme version of the 5 for 15, really. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
No, but those things are connected, right? Is like what I'm trying to get at. It's like the same way that like you should be getting more pay for the hours that you're spending at work. You should understand that the right to be at work less is also a part of the labor struggle, right? This is like old school Marxism. Is that the two things that the capitalist tries to do is tries to extend the workday and to limit the pay per hour. That's like the first sign of labor squeezes. And more people are realizing that the pay is too little at work. But we also need to start making the second demand that the hours are too long.
Absolutely.
And it makes sense intuitively that people are much more productive. But we don't want to fall into like a trap where we're working less, but like, we have more surveillance and more expectations on ourselves when we're at work, and we lose other provisions that we got, like sick days and lunch hours and things like that, right? This is an extremely exciting thing to now have this study done that you can just point to it and say, look, what we're doing right now doesn't even make sense by your own standards, and then use that as a kind of springboard to start demanding more.
I mean, it's the best use of the government to give you time for not serving capitalists, right? And this is why like education is so good, irrespective of whatever fucking program and content is in that school, in the books, whatever fucking books there are. As long as you don't have to be out fucking busting your ass to put money into a capitalist pocket, you win.
And also, I just wanted to note one more thing about this study too. It's like, I know some folks will like to make the argument like, well, Iceland is so small compared to the United States. I think, there's truth to that, but let's also remember the saturation of the policy in the country. It's 86%, right? So yes, it's a smaller country, but that's an incredible amount of people who are now operating on the new terms.
Right. Let's get to 50%.
Get to 15%, right? You know what I mean? Like the fact is that this model can work on a large scale, and that's the point there. This can work on a systemic level, and we could very easily do this in the United States as well. There's no doubt about it, especially when we're in a context right now of more and more people wanting jobs that have better benefits and higher wages, right? That instead of trying to make one person be the only person who holds down a job in a specific industry, right? Spread that around 2 or 3 people, right? You can do a lot for unemployment by sharing jobs without cutting people's pay, right? So don't cut anybody's pay and bring more people into the economy in that way. But instead of having one person doing the work effectively of like 5 folks, have 5 people doing that work and paying them all, the same amount for one person doing 40 hours a week. There's enough slack in the United States economy to do that, and it would make for a hell of a lot better life for all of us. And these are the kind of I want to use the word utopian just because that's like the filler, but these are practical solutions to a lot of our problems.
Right. Here's a so we like what's his name, Keynes was big on like eventually the economy is going to develop.
Keynes thought by this time we'd be doing this.
Yeah. Here's just a stat of Edmund S. Morgan, who wrote American Slavery, American Freedom on the Virginia colony. At the time of European arrival, it took 24 hours of labor a year to feed yourself in corn for Native Americans. So just to say, like, wow, there's maybe better ways that we can be doing some of this stuff.
Yes, I think there's really no doubt about it at this point.
All right.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for making this happen. Episode 27 was a fun one. Victor is going to be joining us in just a couple minutes. It'll be fun. I think Victor, we've had somebody for the post game before, but I'm trying to remember.
We had Burgess or
we may have
Joshua,
had Burgess, but Victor,
sure, yeah.
Victor is our first international post game guest.
There you go.
So you guys can bother him with your questions about Joe Biden, etc. Remember, join us to get access to post game along with our bonus episodes. We have a really fun conversation we did with Andrew Hartman this week on the culture war and the history of culture war in America. I will say, hat off to Matt. He really killed it with that interview. Definitely check that out to get access to that. Join us at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Remember, if you want to ask us questions in the post game, you can do that in the Discord by going to live discussion and adding mod. We'd love to hear some y'all's thoughts and questions, especially ones for Victor. So join us there in just a couple minutes.
Yeah, I'd say about 15 minutes, folks. 9:45 Eastern, 9:45 Central. See you then.